Welcome, everybody. My name is Roger Berkowitz. I'm the founder and academic director of the Hannah Arendt Center at Bard College, and thrilled to be with you today. We are currently reading Hannah Arendt's really amazing book of essays, Between Past and Future, which I've explained are, in a sense, 8 exercises in how to think amidst the break in tradition, amidst the loss of a tradition of morals, politics, ethics, philosophy that she says can paper over um, uh, those moments when we don't know what to do, and we appeal to tradition, to the way it's always been, uh, to to understand the world. And so in the last essay, Tradition and the Modern Age, um we really saw her talking about how the loss of tradition um turns everything into a kind of uh, uh search for values, which are all relative, and the loss of a kind of uh common sense, knowable, worldly tradition that can guide our behavior. Um, the second essay, called "The Concept of History, Ancient and Modern," um, is is drawing out a few radical implications of uh, of this break in tradition. I'm just gonna, if you don't mind, I'm just gonna mute people so we all can hear each other. So, I will say that of all the essays in the book, this is the hardest to read. I think that's clear. Uh, it's sort of all over the place. It goes back and forth, um, and it's complicated. Uh, a large part of the discussion on processes is similar to and another version of 2 or 3 chapters in the last 2 or 3 sections in the last chapter of The Human Condition, where Arendt develops, in a sense, the idea that is in this essay in a much more logical and I think understandable and comprehensible way than in this essay. That said, this essay is powerful in its presentation of the way history is incorporated into the modern age through the rise of science, the way history is made into a science. For those of you who know a little bit of Hegel or a little bit of Marx, you'll recognize a lot of what's going on in her work. She's very much arguing with and against Hegel and Marx in their attempt to make history into a process. Not with it against and that she disagrees with them. It's that she thinks that they have seen something essential about history and about science in the modern age, in a way that we have to take seriously their insight, which she thinks is correct, that history has increasingly become a man-made process. The implications for that, right, are what she's interested in this essay, and the implications are for her quite radical and dangerous, insofar as making history into a man-made process means that history becomes something we create. And since when we create things, we don't never know what their consequences are going to be. There's an unpredictability to all human action. We are now we have put ourselves in the position of gods, who can begin processes, begin not only into history, but also into nature. We can change the world, literally the earth. And in doing so, we can threaten the earth. I mean, think of not only the example she gives of 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 creating nuclear reactions that will set off a chain of events throughout the world that will be unpredictable and unstoppable, but climate change and things of that sort are again the kind of unpredictability of human actions that we can actually um, act into nature and change the world such that who knows what the consequences of these things would be. And not only climate change in the sense that we've created danger to the climate, but we may very, in the near future begin to create technologies that try and clean the earth or clean the climate by acting into the atmosphere or reflecting rays of the sun or who knows what scientists and technologists will come up with, which will be attempts to save the earth. But in doing so, who knows what the outcome, the unpredictable outcomes will be. And so there's an incredible danger to this changing idea of history and nature, history and science, that she sees emerging. There's also political consequences to it, insofar as the turn away from individual events and the turn towards processes de-emphasizes the individual, de-emphasizes great deeds, um, de-emphasizes the care for a person, a unique person, and begins to see us as Marx saw us, as a species being, or as Hegel saw us, as part of the unfolding of the idea of history, such that individual humans come to be only valuable insofar as they only have dignity or worth insofar as they are part of a progressive process of history, which leads to an outcome. And that means that we may sacrifice large numbers of individuals, um, uh, you know, in the larger aim of furthering the progressive cause of history. Um, and this is something Arendt was deeply worried about, certainly thought was happening. Um, uh, she thought both Nazism and Bolshevism were examples of this. Um, and and so she is worried about the political implications of the turn away from individual events towards historical processes. Um, another political outcome that she's worried about is that we lose the idea of a worldly immortality, and turn towards a kind of immortality of the soul in Christianity, and an immortality of the subjective knowledge of truth in um, in rational science and the Archimedean point. And what this does is it alienates us from the world we share with others and leads to an ever more alienated internal life that makes worldly politics ever more difficult. All of this is going on in this essay, and I realize that it's not easy. And so we've broken it up. I'm going to focus primarily on the essay is broken up into 4 parts. And today we'll focus primarily on part 1 and a little bit on part 2. And then when we meet again in 2 weeks, we will focus on parts 3 and then the epilogue, which are both shorter. So today we'll set the foundation for going on in 2 weeks when we meet again. So the essay begins with a section on history and nature. history and nature are different. Uh, um, Nature is, for the Greeks at least, in an ancient idea, something that is ongoing and thus immortal. The Greeks looked up at the stars and the firmament, and they thought the stars last forever. They thought the earth lasts forever. The nature was for them permanent, whereas history was the story of human deeds, and deeds are the most fickle of things. As soon as they happen, they're gone, right? Achilles kills Hector, and it's gone. Athens loses to Sparta, and then it's over. Deeds disappear. Nature stays. And thus man as an individual is a unique being, because animals are just natural beings. They are eternal, like nature is eternal. Because they're not individuals. They exist as a species being, and as part of a species being, ants or dogs, continue and they reprocreate, and there are always ants and dogs, but there are not individuals. I mean, this is the Greek understanding that she's embracing. I know some of you are very close to your pets and may find this problematic, but from her point of view, what makes a dog or a cat an individual is the human ascription of that individuality to it. On their own, they're simply members of a species. And the reason that humans have this distinction from nature and from animals is that humans can not only speak, but can tell stories that are remembered for generations. It's our ability to tell stories and be remembered that makes individual humans able to interrupt the sort of species eternity of the world, of the natural world. And the one being that can, in a sense, die as an individual, who we mourn as an individual, are human beings who mourn each other. And when we do so, when we tell stories about them, on the one hand, the human being dies and that story ends. But we can, of course, tell stories about individuals and also about our political collectivities that allow individuals and certain states to become immortal. And this is the aim of Greek mortals, is to rise above their mortality and to become immortal. The poets and the historians um, uh, do this by telling stories about great deeds, and they accept the greatness of what people do, and they memorialize the greatness in telling poems, or whether it's Homer or Herodotus are two great examples. Homer tells the story of Achilles and Hector, and he immortalizes these great deeds. Herodotus tells the story of history and immortalizes great deeds. She thinks that the Greek philosophers turn away from this and turn us towards a more modern idea of history, insofar as the Greek philosophers say that what is great is not the deeds of man, right? Not Hector and Achilles, not what Athens or Sparta accomplished, but what's great are supersensible truths that have the same kind of eternity as the stars in the firmament. And so the philosophers turn us away from the world towards a world of ideas. And this is the beginning of what she's going to call world alienation, right? Which is one of the central concepts in all of her work. That in the modern age, again, the Greek philosophers began it, but it doesn't become a common sense and exemplary aspect of human society until the modern age, which starts in the 16th and 17th centuries. for her, the turn away from the world towards science begins with the Greek philosophers, but only really becomes a dominant way in which human beings live, starting with the scientific revolution. And so from the rise of the 16th and 17th centuries and the rise of science, we see the development of the natural sciences and the world alienation of man. This is on page 53, where she begins to really dig into this. Like I said, this chapter is a little confusing. She goes back and forth a lot. The ideas are presented, then go back, then presented again, and in depth. So it's a little hard to sometimes follow. You have to move back and forth. But on pages 53 and 54 forward, she begins discussing what she says is the fundamental experience and the fundamental fact of the modern age, which is world alienation. And she quotes obviously Rene Descartes, who famously said, I doubt, therefore I am, or I think, therefore I am, but I doubt, therefore I am. And she says that this philosophical insight of Descartes represents man's search for truth and knowledge when we can no longer trust the given evidence of our senses, nor the innate truths of our mind, nor the lights of reason. Right? So where for the Greeks, greatness was obvious. It was in a deed like Achilles, or a deed like what Hector did. And the stress is always on a singular instance or singular gesture. The Greeks saw greatness as pretty obvious, and saw these deeds as pretty obvious. But with the rise of science, and especially with the insight that the earth revolves around the sun, which of course goes against all of our senses and sense experiences, we begin to doubt our ability to see the world in common with others. If something that's so obvious to us, which is that the sun rises and sets, is actually false, and it doesn't rise and set, but the earth moves around the sun, what can we know? Right? And can we even know that Achilles was a great? Can we know that, Hector was great? We begin to doubt our ability to know anything about a world in common that we share with others. And so Arendt has this very counterintuitive understanding of modern science. It's one that is shared, by the way, with both someone like Friedrich Nietzsche and Martin Heidegger. And so it's not particular to Arendt. She takes it from two of the greatest thinkers of the 19th and 20th centuries. It's also shared by one of the greatest scientists of the 20th century, Werner Heisenberg, who also makes a similar point and worries philosophically about the same ideas. But the thought that these thinkers have is that while science is thought by most people to improve the reliability of the senses, we think, oh, science actually increases our certainty about the world. These thinkers, Arendt, Heidegger, Nietzsche, Werner Heisenberg, they disagree. And what they say is that the sciences are premised on a profound distrust of the senses, and thus a deep alienation from the world we share with others. The very idea of empiricism, right, for Hannah Arendt on page 56, is premised on the non-confidence in our ability to know the truth through our senses. And so the scientific perspective, the scientific age in Arendt's telling here, turns us away from a common world, a world we share with others, a world in which we know a great deed when we see it, a world in which we, know that the sun rises, or we know that the stars are eternal, but men will die. These are common truths, and science begins to put all truths into question. And so that we can no longer believe things we see with our eyes, or even, you know, even things we generally think and according to sort of common sense. And we no longer trust our ability to judge publicly in common with others. We don't know if God is real suddenly, right? You know, we all thought so in the 15th and 14th centuries, and suddenly in the 16th and 17th centuries, we're not so sure. And so instead of these common sense ways of knowing and relying on our senses that we have in common with others, we start to seek scientific absolute foundations for our judgments in universal laws that are known through an intellectual lawfulness. Um, and to do that, of course, we we can't rely on the senses, we can't rely on what we see, and so we have to create mathematical models for the universe. We have to create things like, um, you know, Heisenberg's uncertainty principle, or we have to create, um, you know, scientific laws that will abstract from our collective world, um, and that are not rooted in things that we can see and know and share with others, but that are, you know, come out of a kind of abstract reasoning that looks at the world from above, as if from an Archimedean point, a point so far outside the world that you could lever the world on it. And this is the scientific gaze. Um, it's a gaze in which, in order to know, we have to put ourselves outside the world and look at the world like as if the world were something we could study through experiments, which is what science does. And so we shift our interest from the things of the world to the laws that govern the world, the scientific laws, the law of gravity, uh, you know, the law of vacuums. I mean, you know, we do see things drop, right? But we also think they see things rise like fire. But until you have a law of gravity, which tells you the speed at which things drop. But of course, that law, no one has ever seen it because you've never seen something fall in a vacuum. It's all based on a mathematical knowledge which cannot actually ever be tested. It can only be proven by experiments in which we have to uh, think beyond what we see and extrapolate beyond the facts to what would happen in a vacuum or what would happen in a universal situation. And these are the ways in which the rise of science, she thinks, turns us away from the world and towards processes. Now, this is true in natural science, um, and it's also true, she thinks, in history. So on page 58, right, she will write at the top of the page, in the modern age, history emerged as something it had never been before. It was no longer composed of the deeds and sufferings of men, and it no longer told the story of events affecting the lives of men. Right. So unlike for the Greeks and the Romans, history is no longer about events, about deeds. We don't talk about great people anymore. We now say that, you know, well, which is more important, great people or processes and historical processes? And we focus on processes because we think that history itself follows laws, right? Um, Hegel thinks it follows a law of the spiritual development of the idea. Marx thinks it follows the law of dialectical materialism and class conflict, which will eventually lead to a communist utopia. Uh, the point is that we begin to pierce through the individuals and look at larger, you know, we map individuals. And, you know, the very idea that today in schools we're teaching not US history or German history or Chinese history or Japanese history, we teach global history because we're interested in sort of the global processes and how, and the point is to de-emphasize any one particular history and show it to be part of a larger development of processes. And so she continues on 58. History became a man-made process, the only all-comprehending process which owed its existence exclusively to the human race. The point is that by the human ability to see into and pierce the laws of history and unearth the laws of history, which is what Marx thought he had done and what Hegel thought he had done, we can know the direction of history. At which point Marx can say, well, let's speed it up. Let's help it go faster. And because we know the way in which it's going. And so she says on 63, page 63, the modern concept of process pervading history and nature alike separates the modern age from the past more profoundly than any other single idea, right? The point here is that this idea that both in nature, we have turned nature into a process such that human action, right, matters not only, it used to be that human action was about politics and nature was just eternal. And yeah, we could dam a river or we could build a water mill and we could use nature for human ends, but we didn't change nature. Nature still stayed beyond the human ability to change it. It's not until, again, the rise of the scientific age and the rise of technology that we begin to say things like, well, let's redirect this river, right? We can do that now. Or let's build a lake. Or let's fill up the lake. Or let's burn down the forest. Or, let's blow up the comet that's maybe going to threaten Earth. Or let's seed the clouds so that it snows more. Or let's redirect sunlight away from the Earth to prevent global warming. Or let's put chemicals into the atmosphere that will absorb sunlight and heat to prevent global warming. These are actions that are not simply about using nature, but changing the very natural world we're in. And she says this separates the modern age from what came before in an incredibly profound way, because we can now not only remake, our political world, but we have the potential to remake our natural world. We have the potential to destroy it, but we also have the potential to save it. We have the potential maybe to, if we're losing Earth, create a new planet in which we live on that is a humanly created planet. And there are whole societies now around the world called terraforming societies that are aiming to do just that. And so the natural, the importance of this ability to act into nature is absolutely key for Hannah Arendt. And in the last few pages of section 1 and the beginning of section 2 are where she discusses this. If you've read The End of the Human Condition, you'll see that this is what she's talking about at the end of the human condition. But importantly, if you've read Martin Heidegger and his work on technique, the origin concerning technique, not the origin, the question concerning technique, one of his most famous essays, this is what he's writing about and what he calls the rise of technique. The idea that things in the world, a river, even human beings, lose their essence as who they are, what he calls their stand, their ability to be unique individuals that have meaning in themselves, and become part of processes directed by humans, right? The river becomes a waterway, becomes an energy source for a dam, or it becomes something we destroy because we want to build houses on it, or we want to get rid of it for whatever reasons. Similarly, even human beings, right, become processes. How many of you work in corporations with something called the human resources department? And we become resources. And humans are, we have to keep them healthy, we have to keep them educated, and we plan how humans are going to be living, so that they will be able to fulfill the needs of the larger processes of the economy, or the war machine, or whatever it is that is driving our political system. And so Arendt and Heidegger here, Arendt is very Heideggerian in these pages, talking about the way in which the entry of processes into nature threatens to destroy all natural things, or at least make them subject to human whims and desires. And insofar as man ourselves is a human natural thing, we make even men subject to human desires. And this is the danger she's talking about on pages 64 and 65. She says at the very beginning of part 2 on history and earthly immortality, the modern concept of process pervading history and nature alike, right, separates the modern age from the past more profoundly. I already read this, but it's important. It's worth coming to grips with. This is what she's talking about. But it's not only in nature, it's also in history. So on page 69, right, after she goes through the Roman and the Greek ideas of history, in which we focused on individual events and individual persons and unique events and unique persons, she says on 69, as opposed to the Greeks and Romans who emphasized the event and the example, the modern historical emphasis is upon time and time sequences that reveal truth. In modernity, we read, as Meineke argued, in order to force from history the ultimate truth it could offer to God-seeking people. But no longer is this truth found in a book like the Bible or the Quran. Now history itself is the book of life, the book of the human soul in times and nations, as Herder defined it. In other words, today we make history as we also make nature. Just like we take nature into the human world and obliterate the defensive boundaries between the natural elements and the human artifice, right? We also take history into the human world, and we seek to turn it into a law-like process that will lead where we think it should go. Um, and um, and that becomes that's the major difference. And so we have turned both nature and history into man-made, man-led processes, and that's what Arendt is seeing and is explaining in the first 2 parts of this essay on the concept of history. All right, part 3, called History and Politics, will draw the full out political lessons from this, and then the last part on the epilogue will sort of look at the way in which science really does threaten the historical, natural, and political worlds. But we'll get to those next time we read in 2 weeks. But this should be enough to at least get us going today on this very brilliant and interesting and yet difficult text. So I look forward to discussing it with you. I hope you have I hope it made enough sense that there's some questions and we can have a conversation. Like I said, it is a complicated text, but I think it's a rich one, and one that is absolutely essential for us in understanding our current world and the world we live in. So I'll stop there. If you want to engage in the conversation, you can do so in the chat. Please be respectful of your fellow chatters. And if you want to ask a question, raise your hand and I will call on you. Okay, and really, it can be anything. It can be like I said, this is a difficult text, so I'm happy to again stay text focused and have you ask me about a sentence or a passage. Happy to read those with you and work our way through it. Okay. John Stern is first. John, you may need to unmute yourself because I'm not hearing you. Maybe others are, but
All right. Yeah, I was trying to. Um, there are many pieces to the essay that I have questions about, but I want to try and I'll see if I can narrow in and focus on uh, just one point that troubles me. I hear in reading um, in the essay, or I sense uh, a, a, a tone of futility, and she even uses the word despair. And um, I have I have difficulty when I square that with history, or at least my limited knowledge of history. Certainly, yeah, if I was born the heir or the of a king, or I came from that strata, which was minimal, I did I benefited. But certainly the vast majority and the great proportion and percentage of the population did not fare so well, as best as I understand. So I don't know that necessarily that technology, which is a neutral factor, it's really our choice to what our people, humans, to what we do with it. So I have questions about her sense of despair. Um, I think that proportionately, um, and certainly the world is far from perfect. We know that, but man in general and humanity in general is living better than our forefathers did. So I accept her despair for, that the risks, but I don't, I accept the fact that it's what we face with the advances of technology is a great risk, but I don't necessarily accept her concept of despair. I don't think that squares with the history of the world. Any
okay.
thoughts and
So
comments?
so first of all, there's a number of things to say. One is, I mean, Hannah Arendt is not a thinker of despair. Um, you know, I don't think this is a despairing essay. I don't think it's a despairing book, and um, I don't think there's any essay she ever wrote that was infused with despair. Um, you know,
She seems to use that word rather frequently on page 62. That's what.
well, again, she uses the word, but uh, so she's using the word here to describe the feeling of the experience which underlies the modern age's notion of process, right? Is by no means an experience which man made in the world surrounding him. On the contrary, it sprang from the despair of ever experiencing and knowing adequately all that is given to man and not made by him. Um, that's that's a statement about what led a particular people in a particular time um, to turn to science as an answer, as a progressive answer. It's not at all a claim that she's despairing in any shape or form. She's simply arguing, and I think on good grounds, that a kind of despair about um, the sort of knowledge of the world led to a scientific revolution, which is going to provide a new answer, and replace the old common sense or religious answers that had um, uh, sufficed prior to that. Um, that doesn't mean she despairs. She's just describing here what happened. Um, there's a couple things to say. One is that Hannah Arendt is not a believer in progress, right? So you said, well, it seems to me the world's gotten better, right? Uh, she would neither agree nor disagree with that. Um, she thinks the world changes all the time. Change is part of the world, as is consistency and inertia. Uh, and she thinks changes bring great benefits, and they also bring great dangers and things that are not so good. Uh, and so a lot of her work is tracing both the benefits that changes bring and the things that aren't so good that changes bring, or the disadvantages. Um, and and so yes, we have more equality than we've ever had in certain ways, and yet, as she writes in the origins of totalitarianism, there are a few things more dangerous and more equivocal than rising equality, because rising equality, at least, well, take the example of the Jews, which is what she was talking about in the origins, right? In a world of equality, the Jews had a perilous choice. They could assimilate to be German or French and engage in equality and thus lose their Jewishness, and cease to be Jews, but become equal citizens. Or they could insist upon their Jewishness, but then demand that they were not equal and that they would need privileges. And this led to seeing the Jews as different and as demanding privileges, and allowed other classes in the societies to, when they wanted to ascribe blame to a group for things that weren't going well, to ascribe blame to the group of Jews who were intentionally and standing outside of society because they didn't want to lose their distinction as Jews. So this is just one example of the way in which Arendt says, look, equality brings great benefits, but also great dangers, and leads to a reduction. If we were to actually carry it fully forth, would lead to a reduction of plurality and meaningful difference in ways that are also negative. So she's an analyst. She's not someone who's telling you what to do or telling you even what she thinks you should do. She's someone who's quite gifted at looking at these things and seeing the two-sided equivocal natures of them. In this particular case, science has brought incredible benefits to the human world, and she's well aware of that, and she's no Luddite, and she's not against science. Uh, you can't find anything she wrote, I think, that's anti-science, and yet she is one of the thinkers of the 20th century that, more than anyone else, with two or three others, saw the dangers of science and what it threatened. And in this particular essay, she's exploring those dangers. One of which, in the nature of natural science, right, is that we so fully believe in the power of ourselves to act, not only to use the world, like in a windmill or in a water. Oh, sorry, I have trouble thinking. A vase of a water wheel. That makes energy, but we can now build new rivers, get rid of rivers, dam rivers. We can create new forests or get rid of forests. We can make it snow or stop it from snowing. We can make it rain or stop it from raining. We can destroy the earth and we can build new earths. And the problem is that when we act towards these things, when we act to, solve global warming, we don't know where we act like gods, but without godlike perspicacity. We don't know what's going to happen. And so there's grave dangers. And so while the human ability to act into nature is extraordinary and promises incredible benefits, right? Um, from food production uh to stopping environmental warming or you know, et cetera. It also is one of the most uncertain enterprises of humanity, and so she sees the negatives to it. In the question of history, right, which is what we're particularly interested in this book and this essay, what she says is, as history becomes a process, we increasingly lose sight of individuals, and we begin to think that by knowing the laws of historical development, we can push them forward. And if we're a if we're a Nazi and a white supremacist, and we think that the laws are such that the white race will rule, we can try and begin to make history happen. If we're a communist and we think that the proletariat will rule and that the bourgeoisie have to be eliminated, we can begin to make that happen. Um, and she says this is very powerful and it's very progressive, but it's also comes with great risks because, well, we are not people who can always control the consequences of our actions, um and in acting along history as a process, we often forget the dignity of individual human beings in that way. uh and so uh that's part of the danger. She's here exploring in the way in which not only action into nature is a technology, but action into history becomes a technology. And that's what she worries about, the science of history, as Hegel and Marx and many of their well, most historians today are 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 the progeny of Hegel and Marx, insofar as they look, and you know, it's very out of fashion to simply tell history as a story of deeds. Instead, we try and tell it as a story of processes and unfolding of progressive, ever better, as you were saying, John, advances in human life. And once you see history that way, it's very easy to simply lose sight of human dignity. And so that's her argument. It's not anti-science or anti-process. It's this is what's happening, and we have to understand it. So, um, John Holt, you're up next.
Hi, Roger.
Hi.
Uh, I have the 1961 Viking Press edition, so I'm on page 52. It's probably different from yours. At
Okay.
any rate, it's at the bottom of a longish paragraph where she's talking about uh, Greco-Roman and then Christian concepts of history.
Can you tell me what the paragraph, the first line of it is?
First line is, what has obscured the modern discussion of objectivity in the historical sciences?
Okay, yeah, it's on 52 for me as well.
All right, okay. All right, I want to go down to the end of that paragraph, a little bit below the middle. This sense of greatness could not possibly survive intact into the Christian era for the very simple reason that, according to Christian teachings, the relationship between life and world is the exact opposite to that in Greek and Latin antiquity. In Christianity, neither the world nor the ever recurring cycle of life is immortal, only the single living individual. It is the world that will pass away. Men will live forever. All right. So in Christianity, the goal is to live a life according to the scriptures, according to the morality of Jesus, and you will live forever. So that's your immortality. Um, the Christian reversal is based in its turn upon the altogether different teaching of the Hebrews, who always held that life itself is sacred, more sacred than anything else in this world, and that man is the supreme being on earth. Okay, so my question is this. Um, the one idea of historiography is to see history as a whole. Um, so Christianity says it begins with the creation and it ends with the apocalypse, the end of the world, and the gathering of the righteous into heaven. And that's history. The center of history, it has a center, and it's the incarnation. All right, so history has a real shape. Hegel takes that and takes that same paradigm, that same shape, and translates it into a rational process. Marx takes Hegel's paradigm, that same shape, and turns it again into another rational process, but inverts it. Heaven is not the goal or extraterrestrial life, but the earthly utopia. All
Right.
right. All right. So that's where we are.
You've
And
done a great job so far, John. I'm with you. I hope everyone else is, but we'll see.
okay. Now, with the break in the tradition, we no longer have a sense of the whole of history. We have a sense of the process, and the process in liberal democracy is progress. Progress towards what?
Okay, can I
Yeah.
let me just everything you said up until just there was beautiful, and I think it was perfect.
Yeah.
Uh but the entry of process into history starts in the 16th and 17th century, long before the break in tradition. So the point is that you're right. The If the Greek and the Romans saw history as great deeds and great events and had a trust in it, the Christians are the first thinkers who create a process view of history as, in line with a biblical tradition. Um, Hegel and the rationalists change that around to lead to, as you said, a kind of extraterrestrial spiritual being, and man is simply the negation that allows that to happen. Marx inverts that so that our goal is a process that leads to a utopia. Um, that that historical process thinking continues through the mid 20th century,
Yeah.
into ideological thinking like the Nazis
Right.
and like the communists and Bolshevists. It's only after the Holocaust that the full um the full weight and implications of um the horror break up our confidence not only in the original great deeds of the Greeks, but in the ability of a process history to sort of smooth out all these facts and to cover over the facts. And we see now, we no longer can imagine and no longer can get behind a progressive historical process. That's the break in tradition, and we're left now in this sort of shatters where we have lots of different processes but no faith in any particular one, whether it's Marxism or racism or liberalism or capitalism or Christianity or spiritualism or rationalism. So go ahead, John.
Well,
Everything was right. It's
yeah.
the break is much later.
Yeah, okay. Yes, and I see that. Certainly, Hitler had a concept of history, and
Yeah.
that destined for Germany to rule the world
Right.
on a racist basis, where there'd be the Aryans would be on top ruling everybody else. All right. I still see the remnants of that in the far right today, and what they're saying. So they still have that concept of history that Hitler had, and the progressive left still has the concept of the process leading to a more moral world in which we can live together in a pluralistic society based on law rather than on tribalism, et cetera. And I'm looking forward to the conference next month. Um, okay, that's what I'm saying. I recognize the break in history that she's talking about, but the paradigms, the structures are still in people's minds, even though from from a larger perspective, it's it's not there.
Absolutely. And in the last essay we read on the tradition of the modern age, I forget where it was, but she said that, sometimes even after the break of tradition, these traditions have continued to have power and authority and influence on us, but not a general authority. They are appealing to smaller groups. They can inspire groups, but they can't become they generally won't become widespread totalizing ideologies or processes, because um, we've lost faith in the ability to have one explanation for everything.
I got it.
Still, there are still certain groups. You're right. There's the far right. There's the far left. There's certainly ideological groups that still exist, but this is actually part of her hope, right? She thinks that the break in tradition is actually sort of a good thing, to the extent that it prevents, it stops us from believing that there can be one process that will drive history towards a progressive future, and it requires us thus to think in this between past and future battleground of all these different processes. That's, in a sense, the thesis of this book. And so there's actually a very hopeful, I mean, to John Stern's question about despair, there's a very hopeful element of Arendt's work here, which is that in finally, after 1,000 years of Christianity, 2,000 years of Christianity, science, rationalism, ideologies, ideological thinking, the tradition has crumbled, and there's a new space for freedom. There's a new space for thinking. There dangers come along with that, and the book is going to certainly be replete with those dangers, but also a possibility of something new and hopeful. And that's what she's aiming for. And that's what the book, as an exercise in thinking amidst this situation, that's what the book is aiming for.
Well, that's why I'm reading the book with you, Roger.
Thanks, John. I appreciate it. It was a really helpful question. Frank, I'm not sure we've met before, but welcome.
Thank you. I'm a scholar and I'm driving, so I have a question about something that you said our view of human nature in the 20th century. It seems to me, though, that human beings have always been changing nature. I mean, even the most primitive of medicine, could have saved a life or staved off an infection, even if they didn't know it was staving off an infection. Changes nature, and I'm thinking even of canals, which were built in ancient cultures, and even just the basic things of architecture and agriculture, which changed nature. Is her concern only the matter of scale, that in the 20th century it's been it's on such a larger scale as possible?
Thanks. Yeah, Frank, that's a great question. And let me answer it and say, I don't think it's just a matter of scale, right? And part of this is, this is something she very much takes from some Martin Heidegger. But yes, there've always been canals. There's always been medicine. Humans have always acted to use nature, right? Nature and even killing animals and eating animals or picking berries is using nature. We've always used nature. Obviously, in an industrial age, the factories are much bigger. We use more coal. We use more oil. Or sunshine or whatever it is, and it's bigger, and it's a matter of scale. But even that, I don't think is what she's after when she's talking about processes. What she's after is that at some point we stop, even when we're using berries and eating berries, or when we're making a canal, we still think of the canal or the river as something that we have to confront. The river is there, and it's a river, and yeah, maybe we can divert part of it, or maybe we can water our fields or irrigate our fields with it, but we still confront the river. And the earth is the earth. Can't change the earth, and humanity, humanity is there. What she's saying is that at some point we reach a point, not of scale, but of the way we think, in which the process is more important than the individual people, events, or things. So that it's no longer that the river is there and how can we use it? It's what's the best thing that should be there? Should there be a river there? Or is a river not really useful there and we should get rid of it and turn it into a farm, or turn it into an airfield, or turn it into something else? The point is that we have gotten to the point where we think we can act in such a way as to remake the earth fully, to conform to our needs and wants, or to our views of how it should be. And so that the earth, in fact, loses its stand against us. It ceases to be what in German would be called an object, a Gegenstand, something that stands against us, and becomes something simply a matter of energy that we can use or direct towards our own ends. So it's not just a matter of scale. It's a way of the way we approach things, no longer as things that we need to confront, but as simply contingent things that we can change and make different. And that view of things, including human things, right, is what she's here after, and trying to say is what's going on. I hope that I hope people see that it's not just a matter of scale. It's a different way of seeing things, as instead of given that we can then change. No, the whole world is subject to human making and remaking, and the river is just a contingent thing that we can get rid of tomorrow.
Thank you.
Yep.
Yeah, but that did explain a lot. Thank you very much.
You're welcome. Vigdis.
Yeah, first, I think what she ends the first chapter with is that we are the instilling of wonder as that which is as it is central to this break, I think. And then what I want to ask about, oh God, my dog is, about dog you said, I have a dog that's barking and want to let her out. I'm just quickly let her out.
Okay, we'll wait for a sec. I couldn't quite understand everything. Rosie, do you want to go and we'll let Vigdis come back?
Yeah, just take the next one. I have to let her out there.
Okay. Hi, Rosie.
Okay, well, thank you, Roger, for explaining this chapter in part to me and to all of us, because I found it very challenging, very rich as well. And also, I didn't catch that. I wasn't in at the beginning, but I thought her explanation here of how we don't trust our senses anymore made much more sense to me than it did in The Human Condition, where she uses Galileo's telescope, which always seemed to me as an extension of his senses, and I didn't quite get. But the way she lays it out here, I completely understand her point. It was a great gloss on the human tradition for me, a human condition rather. My question concerns page 68, where she talks about how, I'm trying to get to the beginning of the sentence. Basically she says in the before the break, in that paragraph before the break, for the first time, the history of mankind reaches back into an infinite past to which we can add at will and into which we can inquire further as it stretches ahead into an infinite future. And I mean, there is a point at which human beings started to exist, I didn't think it was an infinite stretch of time. I mean, there was a time when life began. We struggle with figuring out exactly how. But so that infinite there, it disturbs me. And also this idea of an infinite future when we're faced with nuclear weapons and climate change that seem to threaten our very survival. So I just wanted to ask you about that.
No, thank you. That's great. So the idea that history of mankind reaches back into an infinite past, in which she then says this twofold infinity of past and future eliminates all notions of beginning and end, right?
Mhm.
So we're, as you said, I mean, a certain tradition teaches us that God created Adam and Eve, right? But the process history teaches us that no, you know, man began at some point with apes, and before apes there were who knows what, and before that there were protozoa, and before that there was some infinite swamp, and before that there was a big bang, and before the point is that the process history de-privileges any unique event like creation, and moves us to an infinite past in which there's always there's no first cause, because that cause had to be caused somewhere, and you go back ad infinitum. And so it's an infinite past which we can add at will, right? We can always come up with new levels and new stages in it. And we can inquire further as it stretches into an infinite past and infinite future, which will, of course, never end. The point is we've deprivileged man, right? In this process history, because we're looking at the world from this Archimedean point, this levered point way up out there in the universe, outside of the universe, right? Which means that man is just one more, data point in the history of the world. And so there is no beginning, and there's no end. And so we eliminate all religious time speculations, right? And there's no beginning and no end. It's a nice quote to bring out, because I think it's important in that way, but it's also, it reminds us of the preface, right? The infinite, the force from the infinite past and the force from the infinite future, and man is in the middle, and that's the Kafka parable. And what Arendt is saying is that insofar as we have this process view, man sort of disappears and he ceases to be that person in the middle that stops both forces and says, here I am, let's think in this gap. And that's Kafka's intervention into this this scientific process understanding of history.
Roger, can I jump in real quick?
Yeah, who's this?
It's Jason and Zara.
Hey, Jason. Hey, Zara.
I actually was thinking just as you were about this subject, which was until that time scale was expanded, Darwin's project couldn't even begin.
Mm-hmm. Well, I mean, Darwin's project begins with the insight that man is not a beginning, right? And that man is simply one species amongst many, which is why Darwin was, so dangerous for the church. And if you take Darwin at his word, man is not the end of the process. There will be a future beyond man. By the way, that's that's the future that many people today are working very hard to bring to bear, to bring to fruition, right? I mean, Ray Kurzweil in his book, The Singularity is Near, which, many of you know that I've written a lot about and spoke to him about, and had him speak at the Arendt Center. That's his thesis, right? Is that, man is not the top of the evolutionary chain. It has been for a few thousand years. We have been, but there's no reason to think or to wish that we should stop evolution with man. And Kurzweil's argument is that eventually man will supersede himself because man is a rational thinker. He will bring reason into the world. He will eventually create computers. He will eventually create artificial intelligence. And this artificial intelligence will be superior to man and more fit than man to survive. And then the survival of the fittest will mean that the world becomes consumed with artificial intelligence rather than humanity. Kurzweil's argument in the book, Singularity is Near, right, is, well, this is going to happen. We might as well speed it up and make it faster because it will lead to a better future. It's very much like a Marxist or communist version of the idea of class conflict leading to a workers proletariat, a dictatorship of the proletariat, and a communist sphere. Let's speed it up. And so those people who today are actively engaged in the effort to create artificial intelligences that will eventually, in some of their hopes, replace humanity or turn humanity into a subordinate species, are very much successors of a Hegelian Marxist project of history. Glenn.
Thanks, Roger. I don't have a profound question or insight. It's more of a bit of a testimony from an amateur, reader of Arendt. I'm grateful to her for putting all these big thoughts in front of us, and to you for guiding us to the summits that we can handle the air at. But what I love about her is her style as a writer. Some of the sentences that she crafts are just stunning. I cannot get out of my mind how, chapter 7 of our last book, the sentence about little Hans Kohn and Einstein, that's a brilliant sentence. And I don't know if she wrote in German or if she wrote in English, or what it's like to read her in German. But even in the essay we're reading now, and like a simple sentence like the one on page 43, that goes like this: all things that owe their existence to men, such as works, deeds, and words, are perishable, infected, as it were, by the mortality of their authors. That, like, if you break that down into the rhythm of it, into the syllables, it's just gorgeous. It's got a beautiful harmony to it, and I just don't think someone with that amount of music in her can be read in a despairing kind of way. So I just wanted to testify to that. It must be something to read her in German. Thank you.
Thank you, Glenn. I mean, this is something I happen to agree with you. I find reading Arendt, I read her on a number of different syntactical levels, right? On the one hand, when I read her, I try and understand the overarching argument. Then I try and understand each chapter or each, section. And then I try and understand each sentence, like you're saying. And I mean, she is in a sense a little bit like Nietzsche. She's an aphoristic writer. You can pick sentences out of hers and teach whole courses on one sentence. And and I found that, I mean, in order to understand a sentence of hers, you have to understand its place in the larger argument in the book. And yet the larger argument in the book is then magnified and made more interesting if you really fully focus on one or two sentences in it that highlight it in ways that are super concentrated and valuable. And so, if my approach to reading Arendt is really trying to be rigorous in understanding the arch of an essay or a book, but also to find the sentences in it that I can that I think pull out the power and richness of what she's trying to say. So I very much agree with you and appreciate it. On the other hand, right, I'll say this. There are sentences that she sometimes writes that are clunkers.
Right.
And in an essay like this, trying to understand the movement of the essay can be a bit difficult. She sometimes goes on goes and writes about something, that skips it, comes back to it 10 pages later, it comes back. I mean, it's not always the most elegantly structured of arguments. Some of her books and essays are better than others. But some of them really can be a challenge to put together. And I know people who complain about them, and I understand it. But I think on the level of a sentence, she's one of the masters, and I'm with you there. So
Thank you.
thank you. Vigdis, you're back. You've let your dog out.
Oh yeah, I agree. By the way, with Arendt, my dog doesn't tell stories, though I do love her, and I'm very close to her. But yes, there is a distinction. What I was, it is this: we have lost the instilling of wonder at that which is as it is. I think we could learn something from a lot of indigenous people. They have this closeness to the earth. My question is related to when she, on page 69, she points to this secularization as the separation of religion and politics. And she criticizes those who see this as an unbroken continuity they try to establish, while she sees it as a break in tradition. And there she says something very important, I think. The reason they can succeed to some extent in convincing us lies in the nature of ideas in general, rather than in the period with which they deal. The moment one separates an idea entirely from its basis in real experience, it is not difficult to establish a connection between it and almost any other idea. And to me, this is kind of so much stronger today in the digitalized area. When people live in the social media, they live on TikTok and all these. And I mean, that is a kind of a new step in earth alienation. It's not any contact to the earth as such. It's all through the devices. So a kind, when you're glued into the digital gadgets of different sorts, you're actually even more. Maybe that is, yeah, I don't know if you have any comments on that kind of the stronger kind of earth alienation that lies in our use in these digitalized reality.
Thanks, Vigdis. Yeah, I mean, I'm not sure. I don't know if I have an answer to that. I mean, Arendt is a thinker of distinctions, right? And one of the things we're going to do in a lot of the essays in this book and in many of her workings is make distinctions. So she'll make a distinction between freedom and authority, and liberal freedom and conservative freedom, and she wants to hold on to these distinctions and to resist the idea that, well, it's all just the same, right? And in what you're just reading here, she's saying, if we just look at things in the most abstract way, yeah, everything can be the same, and yet we want to hold on to differences. I'm not sure if social media. I mean, yeah, social media. I don't know. I'm not sure I have something brilliant to say about that. But I'll let your statement last, and hopefully it means something to someone. So thank you.
If I just have a short comment about her writing, there's another aspect I think is very important, that she always struggled to find words to describe reality, doesn't she? And that's why she makes those distinctions. So it's this kind of experience something, and how do you to write about your experiences in language? Just a comment.
Absolutely. And one thing that's, to say something again about Glenn's question, she wrote most of her works in English, not all of them, but most of them. And then when they were translating the German, most of them she translated herself. She didn't let someone else translate them. And when she translates them, she rewrites them. She doesn't just translate them. And so there is a way in which in each language there are different works, and that's the new critical edition of Hannah Arendt's works. One of its distinctive qualities, that's as it comes out, is that it looks at each work in both English and German and compares them and tries to show that when she rewrites these things, these books and essays in German, there's something else we can learn from it. Something else to say is that Arendt knew and said she knew and really did know much of the canon of German poetry by heart. And when you read her in German, whole fragments and sentences in her works are simply taken from famous German poems. So she's using the kind of power of poetic language in her writing in German. In English, that is actually happening too sometimes, but it's through translation, and you don't notice it as much. And so I think one of the powers of her writing, I was going to say this to Glenn, and you reminded me of it, but one of the powers of her writing is the enormous amount of poetry she has deep in her brain that allows her to speak in a very condensed, powerful, poetic way. Catherine, you get the last word today.
You were talking about sentences, and this sentence, I don't know, it felt like a little bit of a non sequitur, but maybe it's one that like pops up somewhere else. But it's on page 53 at the very top. And she says, selflessness may still be a religious or a moral value.
Virtue.
Virtue, yeah. It can hardly be a political one. And I was like, what does that mean? And maybe she's going to say more about it later, but I literally wrote a question mark. I was like, huh? So I wondered, it's a lovely, it's also like a very well-crafted and compelling sentence. I think that's why it caught my attention.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, I mean, her sentences, I mean, part of it is her thinking is provocative and is original. And so her sentences are provocative and original. To be selfless, you have to, in a sense, try and withdraw from the world. You can't impose yourself in the world. And thus you can't act in a way that's politically meaningful. It requires a certain escape from the common world. And so but yes, I think you're absolutely right that there's a part of the attraction of her sentences is that they say things that seem so counter to our intuitions, and they make us unravel them like riddles, and that's very much the power of her writing. That's why it's so extraordinary. Thank you all. I'm glad we got through these chapters. They're difficult. The next two on politics and the epilogue, I think, will be a little shorter and I hope now, based on this, more comprehensible. I look forward to finishing this essay, The Continental History, with you in 2 weeks. Enjoy reading Hannah Arendt, and we'll see you then. Thanks very much.